Today I'm gonna talk about for INFJs using TI too much. So there's this thing with people's tertiary function, so the third function in your function stack is the one that you can be using too much when you're kind of stuck either in being too introverted or being too extroverted. There's this thing where if you're, for example, an extrovert and you just want to be extroverted all the time, you're going to heavily rely on your first and your third function. And with the third one, it becomes more of a problem because your first function is still something that you're naturally pretty good at, whereas your third function is not. It's more like a support kind of function where it's like you can use it to support your first two functions, but you can't use it on its own because then things are gonna go wrong, you can't rely on it. Because it's just always gonna be a little bit underdeveloped. Only the problem is that most people wish that they were better at their third function. And they kind of feel sometimes like they're better at it than they actually are. So that can cause problems where you feel like, yeah, I can use this a lot, I'm good at this, and then you overestimate your ability. So for INFJs, this is called the NITI loop. Technically it's normal to loop between introverted intuition, introverted thinking, but getting stuck in it is gonna cause problems. So getting stuck in that and not being extroverted enough. And for introverts, being in such a loop often is associated with overthinking. The thing with introverted thinking is that introverted thinking is a function that's all kind of about analyzing. TI is the function that always wants to know the truth about things. So when we use TI too much, it's this thing where we can overanalyze something. And we're going to kind of want to know the truth about something. For example, it might be that you don't really know what decision you should take. And then you keep analyzing what's going on. And you feel like you have to find a solution that makes perfect sense. So a solution that fits in your TI framework. And you can explain why it makes sense. But when we use TI too much, we can get really confused because we can kind of get in this situation where we don't know if it makes sense, and then we get anxious about that. At one moment we might be like, yeah, this makes sense, and then we start doubting it again, and then we find other reasons, and then we're like, but maybe if we incorporate these reasons, then maybe this makes more sense. But the problem is that we're just not that good at introverted thinking. So we're going to start to come to the wrong conclusions and also get kind of anxious about it because we kind of know that what we're thinking is wrong, and then that's why we kind of keep moving on to different explanations like, okay, this is wrong, so maybe this is right, when in fact we're just overanalyzing it when we shouldn't. So that's kind of how having TI as your third function will manifest. So ISFJs might have a similar problem because they also have TI as their third function, but of course they would not relate to NI. For all introverts, their third function can kind of annoy them when they're overthinking something. And for an INFJ, you're gonna have to understand that you don't need to make sense of everything with introverted thinking because we are not TI dominant people. We don't use TI as our dominant function. And I think, I'm not 100% sure because I'm not a TI dominant, but I'm gonna guess that people who have dominant TI probably do always know their reasons. They probably do have this thing where their decisions and the things they know kind of fit in their TI framework, and it just all makes sense and they know why it makes sense. But for us, sometimes we just don't know. We can't explain it. We can't explain all the reasons. We don't really understand the framework. It kind of gets confusing. And it's like, in such a situation, you have to realize that introverted intuition is going to be your main guidance for life. You know, when it comes to your introverted functions, TI is just a support. You're definitely gonna use it frequently. But at some point, it just stops, you know, and you analyze it for long enough and you have an answer. And sometimes that answer isn't completely backed up, but your introverted intuition knows that it's the answer, because introverted intuition has this thing where it can know things without having a reason or an explanation, because it's this kind of subconscious knowing and gut feeling thing. And that's why our decisions of what we should do are ultimately based on introverted intuition, which means they're ultimately still based on a gut feeling and not some kind of in-depth TI analysis. Because, you know, our introverted intuition just knows more. It always knows more, even if we can't explain it, because it doesn't give you the reasons, it just knows things. So in the end, that's still what we're gonna do. You know, we're still gonna go live our life based on gut feelings that are backed up with TI reasons. You know, they're backed up with TI reasons, but the TI reasons are not the main thing that guides us. Because, you know, NI is not a personal function like TI is, but NI is something that gives you hunches, it gives you directions. Because, you know, FI and TI are a lot about reflecting. TI is a lot about actively reflecting on stuff. But it can guide you because of its future focusedness. It's very future focused. And because it knows the truth about things, but it knows the truth about things without reasoning. I mean, sometimes you kind of can reason what it was based on, but I think that when you do that, when you reason what it might have been based on, that's probably just TI at work. So the reason why we can use our TI too much is because we're introverted for too long, when in fact you should have just taken action and you should have been extroverted and just done something. But you might not want to be very extroverted. Yeah, it can be an excuse, like, not to take action. You know, just analyzing things when you don't need to. Because for myself, I noticed this weird thing, like, over the years. When I was younger, I used my TI more. And I used to rely a lot on it. And I kept making decisions for myself in my life that, like, didn't work out. And yeah, that just didn't work for me. And then when I started to rely more on introverted intuition and on my extroverted functions, you know, then things went well, because it knew something that I just didn't know. It knew what I had to do, but it annoyed me that I couldn't explain it, because I wanted to explain it with TI, but I couldn't. Usually you know when you've thought about something long enough. You know when you're supposed to take an action. Because once you start thinking too long about something, it's gonna stress you out. When it stresses you out, you know, you gotta take an action and move on, you know, make that decision, just move on. So that's a thing what I wanted to talk about, and thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!